All right.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us on the Zwaardkring live stream. My name
Hello,
is
hello.
Sasha, and tonight I am joined by Farhan, who is on the bottom left here. I see that my
Hello.
screen is mirrored again. Hold on, let me just
Uh,
quickly fix that. There we go. Or am I raising my right hand up now? No, now it looks like I'm raising my left hand up.
I,
There we go. Right hand up, right hand up. Hi, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Zwaardkring live stream. Um, Tonight, we are going to continue on building what we discussed last week. Going to continue with the Hangen. We have some interesting insights on that, both from our own practice this week, as well as discussion with other masters. And I wanted to bring that to you, and I wanted, if at all possible, your feedback on it. Then we will revisit the Zornhau. It's the one that we did in the very first lesson, but now I have Ash, and now we will be able to go a little bit more in depth and show you why the Zornhau works the way it works. And we'll go on from there and see if we have any time left to go into Zornhau Ort, as well as the concept of continuing your initiative. But first, I want to greet. So we take our pose, we put our feet in an L, we put our sword down, and we raise our sword up. Say the magic words. Grüß dich. And then we're going to begin. Before I begin anything, I have a little challenge for you. Down at the bottom, over here, I think, is a link, and that link will guide you to a quiz about what we discussed. So I am interested, what did you guys pick up, and can you get all the questions right?
we have to change some settings in the chat because I tried posting the link there and it cannot. It's being blocked. So if anyone wants
Aha.
to go to the quiz, they'll have to type it in manually for now.
Yep, you'll have to type it in manually. Don't worry, those people who are watching this on YouTube, like on Monday, when I usually upload these videos, I'll put it in the comments below. You'll still be able to do it, don't you worry. But yeah, for now, leaving the quiz aside, you should totally do it, by the way, but leaving the quiz aside, we are going to continue with Hangen, because a while back, in one of my earlier lessons, I said that in HEMA, there's a lot of room for interpretation. I think I said this in the first lesson. There's a lot of room for interpretation in HEMA, and there's a lot of discussion on how techniques should be done. And I will always say that whatever I'm teaching here is my own personal interpretation based on my personal experience and practice. So with that in mind, let's look at the Hangen and let's look at some insights I've received over the week, some ideas I had to make the technique better. It's not a technique that I practice often, so practicing it this week did give me a bit of new ideas on how to improve upon it. And feel free to tell me what you think in the chat or in the comments below in case of YouTube video. And then, yeah, let's see it. Let's first revise what the Hangen actually was. So the Hangen was a cut where I cut towards Ansetzen. I cut to displace my opponent's blade. And we did this by cutting with force and with Ansetzen. So I cut towards my opponent's blade, and remember, I cut to my left side. That's very important because I want to put force on my opponent's blade. And I can displace my opponent's blade by cutting towards his or her tip. I take Ash here for a moment. Ash is practicing Ansetzen against me. And is Ash visible on the screen? Yes,
Yep.
I think he is.
Perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine. So Ash is practicing Ansetzen against me. He's in a nice fluke. So I cut where I aim my sword with my strong against his weak, and then my tip is on him. And then what I did with Hangen was, rather than simply thrusting straight forward in, I lean in with my legs so that I can exert force on his blade and push it further aside, in case he wants to try and push it aside for me. So once more, Ash, come on, you can do it. Ash practices Ansätze. His sword is here. I cut, and then I lean in here. So if I do that a little bit faster, like the way it should look as a technique, I cut and lean in. All right? And hopefully with that, with a smooth movement, I should be able to do that. But yeah, this is what we discussed last week. But a thought occurred to me. Ash, look at me when I'm attacking you. All right, so a thought occurred to me that it's kind of slow. It's kind of slow because I need to make two movements to finish my attack. The first one is the cut, and the second one is the leaning in and the thrust. And I'm thinking we can do better. So my thoughts on this was that I want to be able to do this in one move. I want to be able to, in one step, be able to cut, hang, and thrust all at the same time. So this is what I came up with. So rather than cutting and stepping and then leaning in, I want to do the step and the cut as in one go. So what that means is that I want to cut and step, and before my foot lands, I want to lean in as my foot lands. So what you get is a little bit where I cut, lean in from there. So, and I think this works because I can aim at the tip of his sword. He is presenting me his sword in a fluke, so I can aim at the tip of his sword, so I can cut, lean in, and thrust in all at the same time. So one more time. So in slow motion, I'll try to do it as slow as I can, but it's kind of hard to show. So as I'm stepping, I finish my cut already. Actually, you need to raise your sword a smidgen. There we go. Okay. So again, I cut, and as I step, I see how my foot is still raised on the air. And that's because the cut itself, I know I sacrifice in power then. I sacrifice in structure, what Fran always likes to talk about. But I don't need a tremendous amount of structure or power to displace his tip. So all I need to do is practice Ansätzen, where my sword is aiming at him, and then stepping in. So Farhan.
I think the way I would explain this technique is I'm no longer throwing a displacing cut to hurt my opponent. I'm instead performing an Oberhau to seek a bind. That means I'm not looking to hit him, but I'm looking to make contact with his sword. I'm not looking to like push it aside. I'm looking because I want to touch his sword, get into a bind so I know where it is, so that I can displace the tip and then complete my Hangen. You can see Sasha's first action is not a full powered cut, but instead he's just looking to make contact. And he makes contact with the strong of his blade onto the weak of his opponent's blade. So part near his hilt, makes contact with near the tip of the opponent's blade, and that helps him get more control without having to put too much energy into the cut. When that happens, it's trivial for him to push the tip aside to create an opening for him, and then he can just immediately lean in, all in a single motion. This kind of cuts down the amount of time, but it changes your profile of your attack. I'm no longer attacking the person, I'm attacking the sword.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good alternate way of explaining it, yes. And that's pretty much exactly what I'm doing. Trying to seek the bind, bind it, and then as I push him aside, I can lean forward and lunge in. Some thoughts I had on this, like I don't want to tout that this is the way for Hangen, but so I would like to present some thoughts that I had, like why this might not work. First of all, it's a huge commitment, right? It's a huge commitment. I cut at my opponent's sword and I really step in with my foot. So I'm really committing a lot of weight to that front foot in order to push the sword aside, in order to practice the Hangen. Ash, keep yourself together, man. So I am committing a huge amount of momentum forward in order to make this attack work and in order to make the Hangen work. So I think that's a vulnerability, because if my opponent voids, sidesteps, or somehow manages to parry my blade, I'm in a slightly vulnerable position where I can not really do an effective retreat. So I'll need to rely on my like arm work to defend myself. And when I discussed this with my master, Master Merlin from the Netherlands, he also told me that it shortens the range of my attack, because I need to be able to bind with my opponent's sword without a stab, so from my starting position, right? So whereas if I were to step then thrust, I can do it from a lot farther away. Step and then thrust, right? Because I can get that little extra range, that little 20, 30 centimeters of range with my second step. And I lose out on that by doing it in one motion. So I thought that was a good point. And I think it's not necessarily a downside, but it does sort of determine in what situation I can do this cut. Because I'll need to find a closer measure. I need to find closer where I can step in and cut and step in at the same time. So some things that I found, but I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Faris is asking in the chat, is there any issues if you perform the Hangen and your opponent starts moving?
Definitely. I mean, Hangen is not a perfect technique, right? It's a neat, fancy technique, and it definitely works in a number of situations. But one thing of sword fighting that generally holds true is that there's no perfect technique. Everything has a counter. In fact, the vulnerability of Hangen, right, lies in the fact that I'm pushing, right? I am pushing against his sword. So if my opponent were to step to his left, my right, and raise his sword up in a sort of, let's see if I can do this with Ash. I don't think so, but come on, you can do it. You can do it. He raises his sword up, and then in a hanging guard, so that is a terrible hanging guard, but like I'm here, and my sword, since I'm pushing that way, my sword slides down here, right? So if he defends with a sloping parry, he can very easily parry me. And like I said, Hangen is a move that requires commitment. It allows you to lean into your left foot. So when he does that, I immediately need to start thinking about my own defense.
I think it's not so much that we're in trouble. It's rather that if he starts doing stuff, I technically still have the initiative, so that I will not end up performing the Hangen, because I'm already aiming to the bind. I have Fuelen. I know what he's doing in his control of the sword. So if I feel him moving, it's more likely that I'm not going to perform the Hangen already.
Yeah, arguably, but that's basically the answer to everything, Brian.
Yeah, so it's not a problem.
I have a bind and I can feel what he's doing. Yeah, of course. But there are some definite defenses there's some definite defenses to Hangen.
No, but that's what Faris was asking. Are there issues? And I say, There's only an issue if you're hard set on doing the Hangen. If
Yeah,
you are willing to recognize that you have to change your technique,
it should be.
then no, you're fine.
Yeah. Okay, Ash is not cooperative today. Maybe it's all the times I beat him up.
Probably.
All right. You mentioned Fuelen, and I would at least like to explain what Fuelen is, because it's one of the concepts that we will encounter in the next few sessions.
To be
Fuelen,
honest, we really should have brought this up earlier.
Fuelen is the German word for feeling. And it's not like sword fighting with feeling. It's like, oh, I hate you so much, you killed my father. Right? Not those kind of feelings. But rather it is feeling the sword. Right? So once we're in a bind, Fuelen means a way of communicating. Right? Once we feel in the bind, once I'm in a bind, I can feel the pressure that he is exerting on my sword. I can feel where he wants to move his sword by, is he increasing pressure? Is he trying to push me aside? Is he decreasing pressure? Is he trying to move up? Does he move up his sword? Does he move down his sword? All those things you can feel by pressing the blades together. And likewise, he can feel that from me. Once we're in a bind, he can feel what I'm going to do. So there are a number of techniques that rely on a sort of feeling neutral, that rely on, okay, you can do this technique and the feeling on the sword changes minimally. Those are techniques like duplieren and mutieren, where you bind at the same place. And for all the other techniques, it's a contest of who's faster. Is he faster in his feeling on what you're going to do? Or are you faster in your movement in your technique? Right? So feeling is, it's really kind of an advanced concept. And I always say we teach it quite early on, but it will be the last thing you master. Right? If you get really good at Fuelen, then you can really read what your opponent is doing, what he's planning. You know all the techniques that you can do. You know how these techniques feel when they're used against you, so you can take appropriate measures to avoid them. But for that, you sort of need to know all the techniques first, and know how they feel, and have practiced them, and have practiced counters to them. So, like I said, it's the last thing you will master. Anything you want to add, Fran?
Oh, after that, no, that's all
Quite
you
complete.
really have to say about Fuelen.
Yeah. So we'll get to that. As we discuss techniques, we'll explain, like, okay, this is how it should feel, and this is how we go. All right. So yeah, that's what I had about Hangen. Do it in one move. So if you want to do this at home, if you want to try this at home, what you really got to do is mind the footwork, what I'm doing, right? I am cutting, and then with my step, I am hanging in. So cutting, and with my step, I'm hanging in. And if I do that in one cut, it's here. And I really notice that with this technique, I'm really stomping down on the floor, on the ground, right? And that brings me to one thing that we've also probably should mention before. So when you're practicing techniques like this, right, especially by yourself, or if you are with a partner also, basically whenever you practice a technique like this, is called the Abzug. And Fran, what is the Abzug?
Abzug is easy. It's running away. It's basically retreating from the Krieg.
It's your favorite part of the sword fight, isn't it?
Oh, no. You see, using the Abzug assumes that I've gone in.
Yes. So what does that mean, right? Retreating from the sword fight. Well, assume that I do a technique, and assume that the technique hits. I do the Hangen, and I hit, bam, blah. All right? Unlike Hollywood, there's a good chance that the guy is not dead yet. right? Even if I stab out his throat, even if like, death is not instantaneous. There have been reported cases, like from old duels and stuff like that, from people from one duelist, and he strikes him down with a mighty blow, and he turns around to celebrate, and then the other guy gets back up, and he stabs him in the back, and then promptly dies on the spot. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. Right? It keeps people alive far longer than they should be alive. And even from grievous sword-based injury. I'm fairly certain, like, if you lop someone's hand off, 95% of the people will go, my hand! And then, I don't know, pass out from shock or whatever. But there is a subsection of people who will go like, with my last breath, I spit at the kind of idea. My favorite analogy with this is a story I heard. I don't know if it's true, but I like to believe that it's true. Is that apparently in the Dutch military manual, if there's any Dutch military people looking, correct me if I'm wrong, please, but set me straight. But this is the story I heard. That in the Dutch military manual or in older military manuals, like basically troops are said like, assume that your opponent is alive. Like even if you shot him and he's on the floor and he's not moving, assume that he's alive. And soldiers, privates, and like non-medic personnel can only assume that someone is dead if the head is 3 feet away from the body. And I thought that was, yeah, okay. It's a hell of a specific measurement. 3 feet. It's like, is that head 3 feet away from? It looks more like 2 feet. Okay, I better make sure that I don't get too close. But so the idea is that you can't really tell if someone is dead. You're not a doctor. You're not a trained medic. So you got to keep yourself safe. You got to keep your guard up until you're absolutely sure that you're no longer in danger. So even if you hit your opponent, all right, hit my opponent, I want to retreat with a defense. So, Farhan, what's the defense that Ringeck prescribes?
The basic defense, generally, Abzug, whenever it's described, is you hide under your sword, which basically means retreat under a hanging guard.
Yeah, so the hanging guard is either on my right, the sort of extended ox, where I create a little roof over my head, guard this, or I can guard attacks from the other side by doing it over left. So over right, where my arms are crossed, or over left, where my arms are open. So I attack, bum, hit my opponent, and then retreat underneath my sword. One more time. So I attack, hit my opponent, retreat underneath my sword. I like to move sideways. I don't like to reverse, for the simple fact that if I attack, my movement is towards my opponent. So when I retreat and I want to reverse my movement, it costs me a lot of energy. It's easier to redirect my energy to the side and then go there, step out of distance there. Sure, you stay into distance a little bit longer, but with repeated practice, you'll notice that it's quite faster. Attack, stab, and retreat to the sideways. So if I do that from this side, right, attack, and then retreat sideways. This is covering my head with the sword. So yeah, the Abzug. And we're going to hopefully try and remember this whenever we do techniques. If we don't, please do let us know. Sasha, you forgot the Abzug. All right, then...
I think the what we say in class is no posing.
Yeah, right? It's not a Final Fantasy game. It's not like, okay, I attack.
Because one thing students like to do is, after they perform their techniques, they tend to pause and take stock of their final position. But in that case, it's all right if you're trying to learn what you're doing. The first few times, you want to check your position, you want to check your body mechanics, it's fine. But after a while, you realize that you're doing the technique and then you forget to retreat. So
Yes.
that's what we're trying to avoid when we say no posing.
Yes, no posing. This is not a video game. So yeah, the Abzug, do that one. So we had Fühlen so far and the Abzug. So let's see what else we got. Right, shall we move on to Zornhau?
Yes,
I think we should.
Maybe we should introduce the master cuts first, but give people an idea of
All
what
right.
they are and what to expect.
All right, so Zornhau is the first of the master cuts. And the master cuts are a group of techniques, or 5 techniques within Ringeck's tradition, that Lichtenauer, so remember, Ringeck is a student of the Lichtenauer tradition. And Lichtenauer originally describes these techniques as the techniques that you need to overcome the master. So 5 techniques that he says are like top tier. And basically these master cuts are the way of attacking someone while also guarding yourself, right? They have a certain advantage over the regular basic attacks that we've practiced so far. Interestingly, later on, like in Ringeck's time, Ringeck sort of assumes that master cuts are a thing, and then explains each one in counters to each one. So you already see like where Lichtenauer describes them as secret techniques that only like students of Lichtenauer tradition will know. Ringeck sort of assumes that these techniques are already known among the populace and then describes multiple counters to each technique and multiple follow-ups from each technique. So yeah, very interesting. And the first one is the Zornhau. And the Zornhau we've discussed in lesson 1. Okay, Ash, I'm going to move you aside a little bit. And it's also the most basic of the master cuts because it's very much like a cut, like the basic cuts that we've done with a small addition to it. So the Zornhau means the cut of wrath, presumably because it's a very powerful cut, and when you're very angry, you can do this one. So how do we do that? Well, we start in high guard. Can be, I like vom Tag a lot, but you can also do it from Ox if you want. And from there, you make a diagonal cut downwards. But the idea is that instead of making it straightforward over the line of attack, like we've been taught so far, right? Stepping forward, I'm moving into the basic strikes, but like basic cut. Or what you do is you step to the side. Sorry, Ash, you need to basic guard. Yeah. So what you do is you step to the side. And still the basic cut is there. Right? Interestingly, is that even though my position changes, the movement of the sword changes very little. So if with my normal cut, my sword ends here, with the Zornhau, all I've done is move a little bit to the side. And you'll notice that my cut is far more to my left. So the cut more or less follows the same arc, but I move to the side. And this has a very specific advantage. Basically, this is what's commonly referred to as line advantage. And I'm going to need Ash to show what that means. Okay, Ash, basic defense, fantastic. No, keep your sword up. There we go. So, Ash is providing me with a basic defense. And let's observe what happens when I strike at him. Right? Let's observe with a normal basic attack. And you'll observe that Ash very able mind defends himself against my attack. The one time that I won't hit him, right? If I attack him with a normal basic attack, even if I push him to the left, right, I still can't hit him. And he's quite safe from my sword, even if I extend his sword a little bit. And this is all well and fine, but now observe what happens when I do the Zornhau. I step to the side, and I can cut more or less around his sword. Even if I don't cut his sword away, observe that the cut that was previously stopped by my sword, by his sword, my cut was stopped by his sword. Now my cut has a better angle and it can reach into his neck. And the defense, you can see, I don't really mess with this defense. So here, it hits his defense and he's blocked. But if I sidestep here, then I can hit him in the neck just fine. This is called line advantage. Ron?
Yep.
Anything to add?
Do we want to go into how to do the Zornhau, or explain its mechanics?
Okay, go ahead.
I mean,
Explain how to do it.
Explain how to do a Zornhau. Are you making me stand up again?
Yes.
How lazy I am to stand up. All right, Zornhau. Sasha has shown you the basics of performing a Zornhau. It's basically an Oberhau from your right shoulder. We'll get into the mechanics of the left Oberhau a bit later. What you're doing is you're doing a basic right Oberhau from your right shoulder, from vom Tag, and you're stepping off to your right. Now, young people like to do this. I'm going to stand up first. Young people, I have a real sword with me today. I have a proper sword, one-handed though. Young people and people who don't yet feel their knees, their first problem is, I'm going to lower this down so you can see my footwork, is that they will step with their toes pointing towards their target. This changes the direction of the knee and direction of your movement. What happens is you push your knee out. This doesn't mean your cut is weak. In fact, your cut will not be affected at all. What this means is that in about 5 years, you will blow out your knee and you will feel it. So what we generally tend to do is when you step out to the side, toes and knees in one line, and you fall into it. Now, I've seen the Zornhau performed in two different ways. The first one is with a single side step, as in this is usually when it's done as a reaction. They step out to the side, the following back leg does not move, and the cut is thrown along the new line. Conversely, I've also seen this move performed, and two-step move. So you step out to the side to get your line advantage, and then you turn on the ball of your feet, bringing your back leg behind you, turning your hips, and turning into a cut. Now, each has its advantages and disadvantages. The single step is a very fast move. I mean, nobody's going to see it coming. It's great if you're using it as a reaction. It's great maybe as a defensive move for the Zornhau. Or if you're a lot taller than your opponent, or you have longer reach, this is fantastic because it shortens the amount of time you need to do it. But if you think I'm a bit smaller, I need a bit more structure, maybe he's a bit stronger than me, the alternative of turning your leg gives you a bit more power, it gives you a bit more structure. Unfortunately, it's a lot slower. Turning your body also helps, in my case, I found, helps with any follow-up moves I need to do because I'm keeping my body in motion. The lunge, I kind of have to recover from the lunge and pull my leg up behind me before I can follow up with any other attack anyway. So, yeah. All you have to take away from that is, when I'm sidestepping, toes, knee in one line in the direction of my body's momentum, not the sword momentum. Sword is going towards my opponent, knee and toes going off to the side. So, and if I want to cut from there, I cut from there. Alternatively, I can knees and toes in one line, turn the body into the cut. So yes, that is how I would explain the mechanics of performing the Zornhau. I think I'll let Sasha talk about which you should use in which situation. It's a bit more complicated than that because Zornhau works both as an offense and a defensive move.
Yeah, so it's exactly what Fran says. Hold on, let me just magnify my own screen again.
Yeah, there we go.
Back to B. Right. So as Farhan says, right, it's both an offensive and a defensive move because Zornhau is great for attacking my opponent, like I've shown. If I attack my opponent with the Zornhau and he opts for a basic defense, then I can get around that defense and get a better angle at his body. At the very least, I force him to overextend his defense over one side, right? So here, even with my Zornhau, I would miss, but that would mean I can attack him over the other side relatively easily because he needs to push his defense further away from him to attack him. And this is a technique that we're going to discuss likely next week. It's called Absetzen. But Absetzen? Next week?
No.
Oh, no, not Absetzen, sorry. Abnehmen.
Abnehmen.
Sorry, my bad. Abnehmen. And we're going to discuss this next week. But now, yeah, we were talking about stepping. So when I do it offensively, I need to close the distance to my opponent. So my step needs to be not only sideways, but needs to be diagonal forward. And a fair bit at that, because my opponent will likely not stand still, unlike Ash here, and will most likely retreat in his or her defense. So I need to make sure that I cover enough distance without overextending myself, but at the same time while also keeping pace with my opponent's backwards movement. Now, if my opponent attacks me with a basic attack, let's see if I can put his sword in more or less a basic attack position. So, sword's now pointing forward. He is cutting at me, right? He is coming at me. So what I want to do then is, for the Zornhau, right? I'm in from attack. I want to sort of catch his sword, and then cut him and catch his sword at the same time. So he's cutting at me from here. He wants to hit me in my shoulder, like a good cut one would. No. Like a good cut one would. And he wants to hit me in the shoulder.
I don't think we need him there anymore. You can just demonstrate there.
Yeah. He wants to hit me in the shoulder. And what I then need to do is I need to sidestep, push my sword forward. So interestingly, it's a little bit different in this game. I don't make a cut, but rather I push my sword forward in a sort of basic defense. And then after I catch his sword, I angle it into his head here. And you'll notice that this Zornhau tends to be a little higher. So if a defensive Zornhau, I want to defend a little higher, because then I catch his sword closer to his tip, and as usual, weak versus his weak versus my strong, I get leverage advantage and line advantage, just stacking on the advantages, and that will allow me to hit. But in this case, my opponent is coming towards me, so I don't need to take some sort of big step diagonally forward. Instead, like Farhan said, this way I can make a step to the right. Just a single step to the right, right? From there. So defensively, you need less forward movement. You can afford to take a single step sideways. Also, you need the extra speed from not having it be two steps, because he's attacking you, and you need every moment you can scrounge up. So he attacks me, I'm like, cut here. Right, from here, cut here.
But just remember, these are not really hard and fast rules. I have been hit by that defensive Zornhau by my opponent be moving first. I admit it was Merlin, and he is so much better than me, and stronger. But yeah, basically I didn't move. He just took one step out to the side, tapped clean through my defenses.
A good Zornhau does that, yeah.
Yeah, so
So
the beauty of the Zornhau is you can put a lot of force into it, so that even if your opponent puts up a defense, if you can hit him high enough on his sword, you can cause the defense to collapse.
yeah. So yeah. Fun? Wanna add?
Yeah, one thing to note is even if your opponent puts up a defense in that way, Zornhau, if you hit him on the upper half, the weak part of the blade, can cause it to tip. So you don't actually have to worry about defenses. Even if you don't go around it, there's a good chance of blowing through it. I speak from experience mainly. This is why we tell you to defend in the hanging guard, so that it's harder for the Zornhau to break through. Basic defense does run the risk of collapse guard and getting pushed through, especially because you have to turn to your left, and that's where you're weak.
Yes, definitely. I have noticed that basic defense can work better if you keep it a little bit closer to you. You have a little bit more structure there, and you catch a sword with your strong, so you can't have your tip forward in a sort of unset position, but you really got to put your tip straight up. That way you have a pretty strong defense. And you can guard against Zornhau, but like Farhan said, it's a powerful cut, and he has line advantage, so there's a good chance that you might still get hit. Again, not a perfect technique. There's plenty of ways, and like Farhan said, the hanging guard is definitely a better defense against it, because the sword, the more powerful the cut is, the more likely his sword will sort of slide off towards my tip rather than slide down towards my cross guard. But yeah, Zornhau. Side cut. One thing I find very important with the Zornhau is that you maintain the structure of a cutting to the left. I find that my Zornhaus lose a lot of power if I cut through the middle here. I see some people do that quite successfully, and with the range, they can definitely get a lot better, right? Where they really say this, no, Zornhau, it's really just a cut more through the middle, and like I've even seen some people like sort of angle the Zornhau really high to angle it over a defense, but not so much using the line advantage, but using sort of an angle advantage to do it. I've had very little success with that, but that might just be me. And to be fair, I haven't been practicing that particular cut all that much. Practice this cut, where I have a very strong structure, and I aim to.
Speaking of structure, do you want to talk about the Zornhau from the left?
Zornhau from the left.
Zornhau from the left is a completely different kettle of fish.
Yeah, because Zornhau from the left, as you'll notice, makes my arms crossed. And Ringeck generally advises against fighting from the left, but sometimes you fight a left-handed opponent, or sometimes you're just forced in that situation, so you have to do it, right? Yeah, my hands are crossed, so you lose a fair bit of strength, so you really need to rely on that line advantage to get through. So in that case, I would really strongly recommend you take a slightly bigger step outward to get that line advantage in, because you won't be able to through and properly.
From my experience, because I'm a lefty, and I end up practicing the Zornhau from the right a lot with my arms crossed, and that's forced me to rethink how I do the Zornhau overall with arms crossed. One thing I've noticed, the most important thing to notice, is that you are not getting the same amount of range. You are cutting short like crazy. Do not dream of extending the cut to hit the guy, because you won't have the structure to do it. You won't have the strength to do it. Even if you're both on the wrong side, his defense will be stronger because he'll keep his sword closer to his body. What tends to happen is you tend to cut shorter. I think we're going to follow this up with how to do the Zornhau Ort, which requires a much shorter Zornhau. You also end up turning your body a lot more. So you can't just step out to the side and cut it with a single step. You end up hurting your back. You don't have the structure. Even you can see Sasha attempting it. He is not enjoying that position at all. It's going to collapse by itself. Instead, you are going to. This is a more defensive, more passive move that you come in short. Oh, sorry, on the left. So you're going to cut close to your body. You're going to lower the sword a bit more just to get you your structure. We do not recommend attacking with a Zornhau from the left, because the Zettel itself says, if you are right-handed, strike from above right where you are strong. Do not fight from the left where you are weak. But if you have to, you have to change your structure. You want to bring the sword closer to your body. You want to have to turn a bit more into the cut.
Just FYI, the Zettel is the original poem attributed to Lichtenauer, even though we don't know for sure if it was Lichtenauer who wrote it. But it's been by other sword fighters, it's been attributed to Lichtenauer. So it's sort of the original sword fighting instruction, as cryptic as it may be. We should post the Zettel.
Yeah, well, to be fair, there's no evidence Lichtenauer existed either.
Fair. Other than having an entire school fight and sword fighting tradition named after him.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Zornhau Ort.
Yes, let's segue into the Zornhau Ort.
Let's segue into the Zornhau Ort. So, like I said, in your offensive Zornhau, your opponent will likely step back. And what that means is that you will likely not have the range to make your Zornhau, right? If I Zornhau from this far, right, my tip won't reach. And then we're going to basically do what I said you shouldn't do. And Zornhau Ort, Ort means tip. And Zornhau, so basically they say, okay, after you've achieved line advantage, you're around the defense, all you need to do is like thrust in with your arms. This is not like Hangen at all, right? Because with Hangen we said, okay, you got to use structure to push his sword down and stuff like that. But with the Zornhau Ort, it's really just achieve line advantage, thrust with your arms.
It's basically achieve line advantage, use force to displace your opponent's blade, and then stab him in the face.
Exactly. So in this case, we're not looking to achieve a bind, right? If he has his sword forward, and I want to hit that sword off to the side. And with my Zornhau, it being a powerful cut, I can do that. I'm surprised he held up.
Yeah,
right?
Very surprised.
Strong as. So I want to displace his blade. I don't want to be in that bind because I'm going to follow up with a cut, with a thrust from my arms. And it's a very weak thrust that's easily displaced. So it's fast. It's faster than Hangen. But I can't do it if I'm bound from his sword. If I am bound with his sword, I have to do Hangen. And I can definitely do Hangen from a Zornhau, after a Zornhau. But the idea is, cut to his blade, he's stepping aside, and then he's stepping backwards, and then you can thrust in. If you are out of range, it's Swordman. Don't look away from me. Right? If you are out of range, like I am now, right? Zornhau against the sword. See, I don't reach him with my cut. So what I can do is I can either take a gathering step, or I can simply just take a second step in. Now I recommend a little bit for that second step. It's a passing step. It will, because in my experience, coming in with a Zornhau, and especially if you hit their blades, your opponent is going to retreat. And they're going to retreat fast and far. Right? They're going to want to take multiple steps back. So, and since I'm coming in very aggressively, right? I'm coming in, cut, he's running, bam, I need that extra range from the extra step. Now that does mean that I sort of end with my sword high on the left and my left leg forward. And this is not an ideal position. This is not a very comfortable position, but the extra range that you get from that is necessary. If your opponent doesn't retreat, well, you don't need to take the extra step. But
to be fair, if they don't retreat, they're practically stepping into your blade anyway, so
basically, yes. So yeah, that's my experience with the Zornhau Ort. It's basically, it's really just thrust after you do the Zornhau, after you've displaced this blade.
There's a very important thing here in that you must maintain your Ansetzen in this cut.
As
this
usual.
Is the only way it works.
As usual, I must maintain my Ansetzen in the cut, and then I can thrust forward. But hey, that's something we've been focusing on for the last 3 lessons. You didn't forget, did you? You person. I bet you did. I bet you.
You That one there.
That one there. You forgot to do the Ansetzen. Right? You thought, I'm going to do the Zornhau. I'm going to be the most powerful cut, and then you are, BAM! I broke his sword.
Oh.
I broke his sword. But yeah, the most powerful cut.
Actually,
the sword is actually sharp now. There's actually a tip on this sword now.
Actually, it's interesting that you brought that up, in that a lot of people, newbies, come in and cut like they see in like cutting competitions, where they see like kendo people with their swords cutting through tatami mats, and they cut all the way through.
Right.
I think we need to remember that cutting through a tatami mat or cutting through any solid object is not the same kind of cut you're going to use in a dynamic sword fight.
Tip. Sword.
Yeah.
It's 2 parts.
So when you're in a sword fight or you're in a sparring match, you're just moving dynamically, you're moving faster. You don't want to leave yourself that open, and you don't have that much time to focus your cut.
So you really want to cut.
So the mechanics of cutting a person in the middle of a duel and cutting a tatami mat are different.
Sure. Yeah. So Zornhau and Zornhau Ort.
Yeah.
So practice your Ansetzen. Never forget your Ansetzen. Goodness, if I ever meet one of you, and then we fight, and you forget your Ansetzen, it's like, did I teach you nothing?
Oh, but what if they forget their Ansetzen on purpose and try to lure you in with it?
Then I say, good luck. Cut his sword aside, thrust in.
Yep.
So yeah, it's by the way a different kind of cut. I found that when you want to apply Ansätze in a bind, and when you want to apply Ansätze and displace his sword, because I found that if I want to bind with his sword, what I want to do is I want to do a sort of pushing cut where I bind and then slide down his sword so that it's not displaced, right? But if I want to displace his sword, what you get more is a sort of tapping, like I want to tap on his sword. I want to just ding and then thrust in. I do it a little bit exaggerated here, but the idea is, I don't know, for me there's a difference between binding with the sword or imparting as much momentum energy I can into the sword to make it bounce off. And personally, I always explain it as tapping the blade. This seems to work well with some of my students, especially with other techniques like the Krumpau, is one of the other Meisterhaue. It's also tapping the sword rather than pushing down on the sword. Push down on the sword and then you're hanging in, versus cutting, tapping, and then thrusting in with your Zornhau.
This is I think the concept of seeking a bind and making what they call the Versetzen, a displacing cut. So it's something you'll come across within the Lichtenauer tradition. It's not explicitly spelled out, but we don't actually focus much on it. But you will see at times where we tell you you're looking for the bind or you're looking to displace, and then you'll understand that, oh, I'm seeking the bind, or I'm making a Versetzen. We don't spell it out, but you come to understand that this is that situation.
Yeah, especially since I don't like to use the term Versetzen in part of general defense, because Versetzen is also for specific techniques as prescribed by Ringeck. He uses both terms, like as both setting aside defense and the 4 specific techniques, and he uses them like mix and match, and it's super confusing. So you won't hear me say, okay, now you need to do Versetzen, unless I'm talking about the 4 specific techniques. Right? Also tell you that you're looking to displace the blade or something, like tap it away. That sort of stuff. So yeah, okay, exercises you can do. All right?
Cut number 1.
Get yourself a line. All right, you need a line. I don't care if you have to put tape in your living room floor. You need a straight line because you need to be able to measure whether you're stepping off the line or not. Right? I need to start with 1 foot on the left side and 1 foot on the right side of the line. And then when I step off, because this is my line of attack. If I'm doing basic attacks, I'm stepping over the line. But I don't want to step over the line. I want to practice my Zornhau. And for the Zornhau, I need to step off the line. But my sword needs to attack over the line, which is why you need the line, because else you don't know, like, oh, am I doing this correct? No. So step off the line, cut forward, cut to your left, push, make it a firm cut, make it a hard cut. You want to displace his sword if you can. If you have an opponent, what you can do is you can have your opponent hold his sword out like this, right? And what you want to do is you want to cut at the sword and displace it, right? And end with ansetzen, of course. End with ansetzen. And then, if you want to do it really well, right? If you're like, I'm not satisfied with 100%, don't thrust. Abzug, right? Thrusting, okay, fine. What you can do is you can step, gently push your sword forward. Okay, I could have hit you. Then you want to do your Abzug, right? You want to retreat. So you get cut, gently forward, and retreat. The gently forward is so that you don't hurt your sparring partner, okay? So yeah, if you're by yourself, then you have to do the thrust. You can do the thrust as hard as you can. Thrust and back. Cover yourself with your sword. Cut, and back. And that's my shield. So, yeah, that's what you want to do in your practice. Practice the Zornhau. You can also practice the Hangen, which is forward, but remember, cut, step in. If you want to practice the Hangen like I suggest. So, cut, step in, lean in, cut, lean in. And this one seeks the bind, and it seeks to push past the bind, right? If you want to combine the two, you want to do Zornhau and then Hangen. You also can do that. The difference is that you step to the side. Right? That is what we discussed. You want to add on any other practice moves to this, Fran? Do it over left?
No, not at the moment. I mean, usually we do a bit more follow-ups before we Abzug, but because we haven't done those in lessons yet, we should not. Do this one first. Get used to the Zornhau. Do it on both sides.
Yes, left and right. So you do the Zornhau on the right, thrust, Abzug. Then on the left, cut, thrust, and Abzug. All right? And try to get those flowing from one to another so that you have the least amount of break in between. Cut, thrust, Abzug. All right?
Okay, we have a question from Faris.
All right, question from Faris.
What happens if you both do a Zornhau?
Nothing. Nothing happens.
No, lots of things happen.
I mean, you establish a bind, but other than that, goodness. Sorry, Ash fell apart. I'm not going to repair him right now. So if you both do a Zornhau, what happens is both of you are stepping off the line. So imagine I'm standing over here. You see, I'm not standing on the line, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to attack. So there's a new line over here. Say my opponent is standing over there. And I attack him by stepping onto this line. Now you see I've created a new line of attack. Normally that creates an advantage for me because my opponent is standing on the old line of attack. But if my opponent also steps to his right, he steps onto the new line of attack. And you get basically the same idea as if we had both thrown a cut one against each other, where the swords bind in the middle, ding, and neither of us has a line advantage. This is actually where we're going to continue from next week. Because next week we're going to say, look at the number of techniques where we're going to look at, okay, so you're in this bind, what's it called, and how do we go from there? But for this
Yeah.
week,
That's all we're going to talk about for this week.
that's
But
all we're going to talk
basically,
about.
all we have to say is, if someone throws a Zornhau at you, one of the best things you can do is throw a Zornhau right back at him.
Or a Krump, but that's
Oh,
Krumpau best how.
that's a different lesson. That's the best. The Krumpau is best how.
Krumpau is best how. But Zornhau against Zornhau, you end in a very neutral position where both of you have about the same position. So from there, that's really who reacts fastest, who can follow up with the next technique, which we're going to look at next week.
Yep. I think we're done. Are we done?
I think so. I would like to remind you that the quiz link is still down here somewhere. Down here.
It's at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, it's
just
at the bottom of the screen.
Right foot.
Yeah, it's underneath my right foot. Have you done it yet? No, because you've been watching the stream like a good student. But
okay, this is another question from Ferris. What if you do a right Zornhau and your opponent does a left Zornhau?
Any number of things, depending on any number of things. Mostly initiative.
Honestly, what tends to happen is a double hit.
Yeah.
Because the line your Zornhaus are following do not cover you. So regardless of who moved first, more often than not, you end up hitting each other at the same time.
Yep.
So please do not do that.
Usually that's a fault of one of the fighters not realizing what initiative they're in.
Yeah.
Right? It seldom happens that two fighters move at exactly the same time. So what happens usually is that one fighter attacks with the Zornhau, and the other fighter attacks with a cut from whatever side his sword happens to be in. And if that's from the left side, because either he's a left-sided fighter or he's adopted the left-sided guard for that moment, he doesn't realize he's supposed to be defending, or he wants to be like, okay, I'm going to do the superior attack that's supposed to be done in this. And then they end up hitting each other.
Yep.
Yeah, when it comes, yeah, okay. Okay, 2 seconds. When it comes to initiative, you are the initiative you are. We always say, yeah, fight in war, fight first. Yes, that is true, unless you're not war. Then you are Nach, and you have to realize that you're Nach, and you have to act like you're in Nach. Because if you act like you're in war while you are not war, then you're going to get hit or get double hit. So one fighter misjudged their initiative, and then you get a double hit. Happens all the time, and it's annoying.
Yeah. Don't worry. As you gain more experience, you get over it. Rian is asking something about upsets. And Rian, we don't quite understand what your question is.
I haven't heard his question, so maybe you can tell me. And
it was 2 words: upsets and happen.
Upsets and happen. We talked about upsets 2 weeks ago. So look for lesson 3, I believe.
I think he's asking basically what happens if
you do upsets against and Zornhau.
Yeah.
Yes, you totally could.
One is in left, one is in right. Would it upsets and displace it? I don't know the answer to this.
Oh, upsets in the left versus the Zornhau in the right.
I don't know the answer to this.
Because generally, I think the Zornhau might beat the upsets in then. Because the Zornhau comes in over the line that the upsets in is not covering then. And since he steps sideways, my thrust is likely to miss. Also, his sword should be in a defensive position. So even if I were to follow with my opponent, he will likely be able to cut against my sword. Now, if he does upsets on the correct side, right, I get attacked. He's doing the Zornhau over here, and he attacks me on my left. And I do the upsets on the left. Then it's a really good defense against Zornhau. Because you catch his Zornhau at your crossguard, where it loses most of its power, and then you can thrust in. The only thing that I would like to say then is if you have a sword without a shield, what you got to do is you got to hold your sword like an inch from the crossguard, because else you're going to get hit on your hands, especially if you're wearing gloves, because the gloves bulk up your hand. So if I want to do absetzen against the Zornhau, I gotta preserve a little bit of space, or have a shield on my sword. I mean, that's fine. Does that somewhat answer your question, Rayan?
He has not said anything, so I'm going to
I assume that it's because the Twitch has a 20-second delay. Like now, it should be about coming through.
No, he hasn't said anything. All right, we can move on for a while.
I'll move on for a while, and if he has any comments, then get back to
he's typing on the phone.
Okay.
So let's move on, and we'll see how we get.
Okay, so yeah, we've covered exercises. We've covered the Zornhau and Zorn Ort today. And then I think that's about it. So let's greet off. Ladies and gentlemen, let's assume our position. Sword down, feet in the L, raise the sword up. Say the magic words.
One more, Rian, just type your question. We'll get back to you next week with an answer. I'm sure you'll be here, right? Christy.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you haven't already, I would like to remind you that we have a YouTube channel where all these streams go on to. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and follow and like our videos. It really helps. Give us a few views. And then see you next week.
All right. Thanks for showing up, everyone.